interwebs! Hell yes, it is finally time to talk about yet another Marvel feature film release, and I am so excited to talk about this one because I'm going to be reviewing Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings. Before we get into this, and by the way, I am so excited to talk about this movie because I absolutely loved it. Spoiler warning there. But I'm going to be talking about this movie mostly spoiler-free for the first part of this review. And then there are a few things that I want to talk about in the spoiler-filled section. But I'll give a warning when I sort of get to the spoilers about things that I want to talk about with this movie in terms of big spoilers and big reveals and surprise cameos and stuff like that, which we all know happens in Marvel movies. So I will give a warning, but until that point, we'll be talking spoiler-free. So if you have not seen the movie, don't worry. You'll be able to stick with me for just a little while. With that being said, let's get into the spoiler-free discussion here because I am so excited to talk about this. Like I said, this movie is fantastic in my opinion and might be my favorite Marvel origin movie, or at least first solo film for a superhero character since Captain America, the First Avenger. This is such a strong debut for Shang-Chi and the character into the Marvel Universe. I was just enjoying it from end to end. Starting things off, let's talk about the sort of general plot of this movie. This movie's plot is extremely, extremely strong. While this movie is, I think, almost 2 hours long, for most of this movie's runtime, it was clipping by. I so very rarely felt the length of this film, especially during the first two acts of this movie. We'll talk a little bit more about the third act. I do think the third act of this film drags quite a little bit because it gets into, without spoiling too much, big CGI fight stuff that tends to be a big problem with many Marvel movies' third acts, and superhero film in general's third acts, where they just have these big CGI mess fights, and you can start to feel the length there. But before that, this movie felt so strongly character-driven, character-motivated, was really dealing with the sort of like character moments and character beats of the film, and those felt more front and center than the plot of the movie, which, you know, Marvel sometimes, while they do have strong characters, they do sometimes have a propensity to focus a lot on the plot, but this movie really felt like it was dealing a lot more with the interiority of our characters going on here. Really felt like it was really focused in on dealing with some of the introspective aspects of this character. And I think that comes across most especially in the most refreshing thing about this film, and that's its tone. This movie, despite being a Marvel superhero bombastic film, and it does certainly have its bombastic moments, it felt oddly subdued. And I don't say that as a negative, I say that as kind of a refreshing moment. There are several moments throughout this film that are like the big superhero moment that you see in all the Marvel movies that get the bomb, bomb, ba bomb, like Avengers theme moment going on with the score, and you feel like, yeah. But in this movie, those moments came across as a little bit more, I don't know, just emotionally toned down, but not in a way that took away from the moment, but made it focus more on, oh, this feels like a more kind of interior journey for the character. Again, without spoiling too much, there's moments in the third act of this film where there's like a big, huge moment, and yet the music underscores it, underplays it, and it makes you really feel the character's emotion, Shang-Chi's emotion within this. And I was so deeply pleased with that sort of refreshing take on tone here. The other thing too, speaking on that front, the characters in this movie are incredibly, incredibly strong. Shang-Chi, I think, is such a great character. He feels really fleshed out, and he feels very real. The actor brings such a warmth to this character in his performance that I deeply enjoyed and resonated with. I just felt like he felt like a fully fleshed out human being throughout all of this. And that's even more doubly so that while he does have this crazy backstory that I don't want to get into, for the most part of this movie, he's just a normal dude who can fight really well. And I liked seeing that sort of like, while there is crazy cosmic stuff going on here, he feels grounded. And the actor really brings that across in such a strong way. And there's just moments of humor and comedy and over-the-topness, and yet moments of subtle, like, just sitting with the character in a really nice way that just really makes me feel for the character. I do feel, if I give it a little bit of a negative, that some of the emotional moments in this movie, just because there's just a lot going on, even though this is a longer movie, there were some moments where I feel like the character beats weren't too fast, but they felt clipped, if the distinction is clear. Like, I was just like, oh, I wish that moment had had a little bit longer, just a few more seconds, a few more beats, just to let me feel it, to let me hit with it. But the movie just has a sort of steady pace throughout it. This pace isn't fast by any means, but it's steady, and it doesn't vary too much throughout the film. And so I feel like because the pace doesn't really vary too much throughout the film, it does lead some of the character moments to get a little bit lost and not as strong as they could have been, but every moment is strongly written and performed and done. I just think that the pace of the film could have been probably better done in the editing. I think is probably where I'm feeling that most. The editing could have been a little bit more varied in tone and feel throughout. Is probably my major negative throughout this. But moving on from that, though, the other characters in this film are fantastic. Shang-Chi's sister, Xiling, I apologize, I'm probably mispronouncing her name. I do apologize. I'm probably going to be terribly mispronouncing names throughout this video, so my deepest apologies on that front. I'm trying my best. But his sister she is also strong. She's a little bit undercharacterized, but the moments that she does get are really very strong. You really do get this sense that there's this whole storyline with her that because she was a woman, because she was seen as a girl, her father never paid attention to her. That he always focused on Shang-Chi and sort of him wanting to take over the sort of the organization and the 10 rings. And so she got passed by, and so she felt an impetus and need to try and be better than everyone else around her, which is a common thing. And I like that sort of feminist theme throughout this film, but it never beat you over the head. It always came out of the character and what she was feeling. So these themes are there, but they're never like front and center, nor are they sort of like overt. They're just from a true character-driven place. Now, I wish we could have done more with that. I feel like there were moments that could have been stronger because of that, but I do feel like the moments that are there are very strong and come across very strongly. However, the scene stealer of the movie is Awkwafina as Katie. Awkwafina is so wonderful throughout this film. Every scene, she's making me laugh. She's saying something funny. She feels like she's just that comic relief character that you get in a lot of Marvel movies. And yet, at the same time, she has just as much moments of caring, of empathy, of drama. And while she herself doesn't have a huge character arc through the film, she does have a small one, and it is satisfying when it does get paid off. And also the moments that she shares with Shang-Chi really also feel just very weighty and moving within them. And I think it speaks to Awkwafina's strength as an actor. Every time I see Awkwafina, she is always hilarious and yet can also bring the drama with everything that she's been involved in, whether it be sort of the big drama movies that she's involved in or the comedy movies that she's involved in. She always brings her A game, and that is no less the case here. Also, speaking of characters, the villain of this movie, Shang-Chi's father, one of the most in-depthful villains I've seen for a feature film in Marvel. He did not, in many points throughout the film, he did not feel like a villain. He felt like just a character who was flawed. You understood his motivations, was dealing with trauma, and bad dude, manipulative dude, definitely a manipulative guy, but you kind of understood where he was coming from, and you kind of understood where he was, why he was choosing to do the things that he did. And so I really just loved that depiction of this character, because he just did not come across as like the, haha, I'm the Marvel villain, but you really felt for him at several points, even despite knowing that he is a manipulative jerk, even despite knowing that he has done some terrible things. You do have some moments of being like, yeah, I feel for this guy, even if I don't agree with him and find him gross. I understand him, and it was just a very depthfully written character for the villain of this piece. 3 last things that I want to quick mention in my spoiler-free section here, though. Number 1, action in this movie. This is by far probably some of the best action sequences that I've seen in all of Marvel movies. Marvel tends to have, like, because they don't choreograph things super, super well, and their actors aren't, like, made to be, like, martial arts fighters or, you know, do a lot of choreographed heavy fighting. A lot of their fight scenes tend to be very heavily edited, very tight, very close-up cameras, and it can be a little bit jarring. It's not bad, but it's more just functional within a Marvel movie. This movie, though, does what good action should do, and it pulls back, it gives you a wide, it does longer takes, and lets you just sort of see all the action and choreography going on. And the choreography is very, very masterful. It is not like the top-tier kung fu movies that I've ever seen, but it is definitely the top or towards the top for Marvel films, and I really just enjoyed that. Like I said, I've seen better like kung fu movies, like in things like Ip Man, which is some of my favorite kung fu films. But this one This is definitely of the top tier in terms of action in a Marvel movie. Secondly, the cinematography in this film is also just beautiful as well. Not only the fight sequences, but the colors and the vibrancy and the use of color and just the images that they display throughout all of this feel so evocative and real, and some of the strongest cinematography I've seen in a Marvel movie to date. It feels like the storytelling, it didn't feel as functional as other Marvel movies are, where it's just like, all right, we're getting the story told in sort of a standard Hollywood way. The cinematography feels much more like it's trying to evoke the mood and the feeling and tell the story visually in a very strong way. So that was excellent as well. Again, not the best. This isn't like top tier cinema sort of thing for me, but it is top tier Marvel in that sense for me. And the final thing that I wish to talk about, and I'm going to fully admit that I am not the best person to listen to this issue on or discuss this issue on, so take my opinion on this part of it with a grain of salt. But for my money, the depiction of an Asian character on screen in a Marvel movie for the first time, a movie that really focuses on an Asian character front and center, not the first Asian character Marvel, but the first like front and center Asian character in a Marvel movie, I feel was done very, very well. Number one, I feel like, again, I am not part of this culture. I can't speak if the culture was depicted well, but for my money, it looked as if it was. It did feel like the different culture little touchstones were really respected and brought forth in a similar way to how Black Panther did the same for African culture and Black culture. Within that film, I feel like I can't speak to that necessarily, but as an outsider looking in, some of that did come across to me, and I would love to hear from members of that community more about the cultural representations. However, small things too that I did notice that I, have gleaned from just my friends from different cultures and things like that. There are moments where the characters discuss like the Americanization of people's names, that when they come from other cultures, they Americanize their names, or like Shang-Chi used his name Sean here, and that's sort of done for humor, but I know that that's also something that does happen to sort of Americanize, westernize someone's name in order to fit in with American culture. And there's discussions of whether someone's American or not within this, and different language barriers that come up at certain moments. It's not the most in-depthful, but it is touched upon, and that feels, as someone, again, from the outside looking in, feels authentic to what I have sort of gleaned from listening to people's experiences and from friends of mine who have gone through similar experiences. I felt all of that came across very, very well and respectfully for my money, but again, I am not the best person to listen to on that front. So I would say that you should seek out many other voices on that in order to discuss that and hear voices on that. All that being said, though, let's get into some spoiler discussion. So if you have not seen the movie yet, this is where you should get off. Otherwise, we're going to get into some spoiler-filled stuff. So getting into spoilers, some things that I really, really loved throughout this film is I loved Trevor Slattery appearing from Iron Man 3 and All Hail the Chief and sort of acknowledging him. It was just a fun little addition seeing Ben Kingsley back here playing that character, acknowledging the cultural appropriation that the character was and the problems with that character, both in-universe and out-of-universe, acknowledged in this movie. It was really, really just kind of fun to see him back and paying off that plot thread from Iron Man 3 and All Hail the King. The little Marvel one-off that Trevor Slattery appeared in. He was a good little, he was the comedic relief character within this, but a nice little tying off of that idea as well. So great to see him. I loved his scenes. Sometimes he was like during the final battle, he was a little bit distracting being there, and some of his jokes kind of fell flat for me because I was sort of like, okay, I want to kind of pay attention to the other stuff. But on the whole, I enjoyed him being back here. I also liked seeing some small little Marvel tie-ins here, like we do get reference to Thanos, we do get to see Wong, who was a nice little surprise appearance, Abomination comes in here, but it never distracted. This didn't feel like, this movie felt like it could have just been its own film, not set in the MCU, but it was nice to see those little connections, but not distracting. Whereas I feel like sometimes in other Marvel movies at this point, sometimes those connections do tend to detract or at least distract from the main narrative. I think of something like Captain Marvel to a degree. Whereas this one, it feels a little bit more subtle and natural and really allows the focus to stay on these characters, which I really, really enjoyed and liked and thought was nice. It also does get me towards my negatives of this film in that some of the stakes of the movie towards the end kind of just get told to us and not shown to us. There's a lot of like, and then there's the alien things that come from this dark realm that are gonna attack us and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's just kind of like told to us and not really shown to us, and it's just sort of like there to have a big CGI monster fight towards the end and have that level of stakes, and feels a little bit forced in terms of creating the conflict towards the end of this movie, and makes Shang-Chi's dad look kind of like a chump a little bit throughout all of this. So that was a little bit of a negative for me. However, flipping to a positive, while I did not like the backstory of the sort of like stakes of the film, the backstory of the revelation of the characters, of Shang-Chi's backstory and his relationship with his sister, and how that was doled out really, really worked for me. I thought the emotional beats and the revelations of like him being revealed to have killed the person who killed his mother it came at the right moment, at the right time, and really hit hard. And I really just enjoyed that revelation for the character and what it brought to him in his sort of end catharsis at the end of the movie. So I really liked the evolution and structure of the backstory. Not a big fan of the fridging of the mother. We get a fridging of a woman characters to further, two male characters arcs, the villain and Shang-Chi's. But I'm not the biggest fan of that. But that being said, if it's going to be used, this was an effective way to use that unfortunate trope. So I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it was done effectively for what it was here, and I think it came across very emotionally, and I enjoyed it for what it was, even though I wish there had been a way to write this where you didn't have to fridge the mother in order to do this. But as it stands, I like what it gave us for what it is, if that makes any sense. The last negative that I'm going to end on here was the big end CGI fight. Like I said, most of this movie felt like it moved by at a brisk pace that I appreciated, and I never felt slow and never felt like I was like waiting for the movie to end until the last like 10 minutes of the movie. Everything after Shang-Chi's father basically dies and there's the big dragon, I'm sort of like, okay, I get why this needs to be a thing, but I did get kind of a little bit bored with it at a point, because I felt like the emotional catharsis with his father was what I really cared about, and then everything after that with the big CGI dragon was just like, there was some emotional beats within there, like with the sister, which was nice, but I stopped caring. Like the stakes, I did not care as much about the big dragon thing because I knew they were going to beat it, whereas the emotional stakes were stronger with the father. And so once he passed away, I kind of stopped caring a little bit more, as much as I stopped being as invested, I guess is the best way to put it, as I had been up until that point, because I was just sort of like, and now I kind of know where this is going to go throughout the rest of this. But there were some good moments within that, but it did feel, I was just sort of like, and let's sort of wrap it out. It did go on. It overstayed its welcome just a tad for me. However, let's end on the final positive note, is the after credit sequences with this movie were really, really fun. I like seeing the post credit sequence with Shang-Chi's sister. I like seeing her in charge of the 10 rings and sort of allowing women to perform there. That was a nice completion of her arc within that. However, the other after credit sequence that we got with this sort of like bringing Shang-Chi into the Avengers world and getting to see Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner back was really, really cool. And the little hint of like, ooh, where are these 10 rings from? They're sending out a beacon, sort of like this sort of lingering question of going further. And this is kind of interesting to me because this doesn't speak to the multiverse to me. It doesn't necessarily speak to Kang to me, who are sort of like the two bigger pieces going on here. It doesn't also speak to me to the sort of Dark Avengers team that's being sort of set up by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Those are sort of the those are sort of like the three major sort of ongoing Marvel plot lines: Kang, multiverse, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And the beacon in the 10 Rings does not seem to me to be part of any of those storylines. So I'm curious to see where that is headed and where that's going to be going. And I'm honestly curious if possibly Marvel may not be going for a Thanos route where there's like one big bad. We all assume sort of Kang the Conqueror is going to be the next big Thanos type villain for this piece. But looking at the Eternals and their own stuff that they've got going on there, and this stuff with Shang-Chi and things like that, is I wonder if it's going to be like a confluence of many different things, which I think would be an interesting way to go for Marvel, which would be, instead of having one big bad like Thanos, it's a bunch of crap going on all at once that the Avengers are sort of going to have to put up multiple different fires and be stretched too thin, which would be kind of an interesting take on it. You know, you have the Dark Avengers, you have Kang, you have the multiverse, you have all this other stuff going on, and I'm curious to see how that's going to be played out. Now, maybe it will all coalesce into one big villainy thing, but I am interested to see where all these disparate pieces are going, and I'm kind of curious about that. The other thing with the after credits sequence that I thought was weird was Bruce being back in his normal human form, not his Hulk form, because they made a big deal in Endgame of him being, in Hulk's body and accepting of that, but now apparently he's back in his human body and also has a broken arm, it looked like, which was interesting. I'm curious about that. So I'm sure that hopefully it'll be answered at some point in the timeline. So yeah, I'm curious about that. I'm sure we'll get an explanation maybe potentially at some point, but that was sort of like I guess he's not Hulk anymore. Weird. But otherwise, intriguing nonetheless. And also the last bit with their singing with Wong, getting drunk with Wong was great. I enjoyed that. So overall, my thoughts on this, while there are some nitpicky things here and there, like some of the pace not being varied or the third act going on a tad bit too long for my taste, on the whole, this was a strong film that I deeply enjoyed and one of my favorite Marvel origin movies, hands down, so far. I loved it, and I'd love to hear all your thoughts on it, so let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, and all that stuff. I'm going to head to bed because I'm filming this late at night, and I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.